Hello and welcome to the 40th Radical Poetry Reading. I'm Malva Kajali, Special Projects Associate here at The Rail, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming poet Paolo Javier, who has curated a fantastic lineup of poets and performers for us today, featuring our Zamora Linmark, Shaheen Qureshi, Kiki Rivera, and Charles Valle, whose debut collection, Proof of Stake and Elegy, comes out tomorrow with phonograph editions, so congrats, Charles. Finally, we've started out all of our events here with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. And I think it's worth saying that the heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all those who struggle in freedom, in recognition that when it comes to our liberation, our histories never unfold in isolation. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat for a living document of resources and actions that we've been putting together behind the scenes at The Rail. But now it's my honor to welcome our wonderful curator, Queensborough Poet Laureate 2010 through 2014. Paolo Javier now joins us as our honored Lunchtime Poet Laureate. He was born in the Philippines and grew up all across the world. He's produced 3 albums of sound poetry with Listening Center, including the limited edition pamphlet, hybrid pamphlet cassette, Urlea Aclopolis, and the booklet cassette, Maybe the Sweet Honey Pours. His 5th full-length book of poetry, OBB, a weird post-colonial techno dream pop, with illustrations by Alex Tarampi and Ernest Concepcion, is forthcoming from Nightboat in fall of this year. Paolo, take it away.
Thank you so much, Malvika. Thank you, Fong, and the fantastic folks at The Rail for inviting me to be a part of your distinguished series and for being so welcoming and putting this event together. Always happy to do anything revolving around lunchtime. Know this about me. Nod to Franco O'Hara also. Happy Pride, first and foremost, to everyone. And for what it's worth in this particularly xenophobic moment in our country, a happy National Immigrant Heritage Month. Thank you to Zach Linmark, Shaheen Qureshi, Kiki Rivera, and Charles Valle for being a part of our event today. I can't wait to hear you read. And thank you, members of our Zoom audience, for joining us today and having lunch with us, and putting us in your very busy Zoom calendar. And if you're in New York, I totally get why you're indoors too. So, thank you. I'll start by just asking maybe myself the question, what makes this particular episode or reading of the Radical Poetry Reading Series radical? I think of a few reasons. One, it's an extremely rare opportunity, certainly for an East Coast-based curator like myself, to be able to gather for the same event authors who live in such diffuse time zones and who call the Pacific Northwest, Hawaii, and Manila home. 2, Zach, Shaheen, Kiki, Charles, and I share a background in interdisciplinary and experimental writing. And it's rare that you'll see us, A, reading together, and B, taking up space in a series like this one. 3, it seems radical for anyone really to be centering Filipinx US American voices in this exceedingly anti-AANHPI moment. A moment that is especially jarring for us Filipinx folks who continue to suffer murderous attacks by racists, scapegoating ANHPI folks for the pandemic, despite us serving tirelessly in the front lines of this country's battle against the COVID-19 virus and saving countless non-AANHPI lives at the horrendous cost of our own. Last I checked, I think flips make up 1/3 of deaths among nurses and medical staff in our hospitals. Fourth reason, to quote from a book title of the great Filipinx American modernist Jose Garcia Villa, have come, am here. Zach, Shaheen, Kiki, and Charles continue to do the radical work of creating spaces on the page and on the stage for others, certainly BIPOC, queer immigrant voices, despite their own experiences of invisibility and erasure in spaces of labor, study, culture, and leisure. So my humble hope is that today's reading returns some of that love to these four remarkable authors. Noting this, I'm super happy to introduce our first reader. Zamora Linmark is the author of four poetry collections, including The Evolution of a Sigh and most recently Pop Vérité, all from Hanging Loose Press. He's also published three novels, The Importance of Being Wilde at Heart, Leche, and Rolling the R's, which he'd adapted for the stage and had its premiere in Honolulu in 2008. Zach is currently the writer in residence at Phillips Academy in Andover, where he is at work on a novel and editing an anthology of prose and poetry in Hawaii Creole English, tentatively titled No Talk Li Dat. I probably butchered it, Zach, so please correct me. One more thing, folks who know me have probably heard me sing the praises of Zach to no end, but I truly can't think of a more urgent time than right now to discover/return to Rolling the R's and its sequel, Leche. Truly, these two books roll the R in the word radical and embody the new in the word novel in ways that can forever alter the shape and direction of literature. I'm so honored to welcome our quarterback, or quarter Zach, to this episode of the Brooklyn Rails Radical Poetry Reading Series. Mabuhay, Zach.
Hi. Good afternoon. So I'm okay. That's fine. Okay. Can you hear me now? All right. So I'm gonna read a poem that I translated, appropriated from Federico Garcia Lorca, Fable of Three Friends to be Sung in Three Rounds. I'm gonna read it in Pidgin, but before I read it, I wanna talk a little just a little about what Pidgin is, or Hawaii Creole English. Pidgin, or Hawaiian Pidgin English, was first used as the language of commerce between Hawaiians and European sea captains. It made trade possible. White men got their sandalwood, they got their supplies, they got their capital, water, land, power. Then from mid-1800s up to early 1900s, with the arrival of contract laborers to Hawaii from China, Portugal, Japan, Puerto Rico, Korea, and the Philippines, Pidgin spread like cane fire in the plantation camps. Every ethnic group adopted Pidgin and gave it their own variation, mixing it with words and sentence structures from their mother tongues. Pidgin became more complex, more colorful, more dynamic, and against the Tower of Babel, it became the common language of strangers. And technically, the term Pidgin, or the language that we speak in Hawaii, is technically called Hawaii Creole English, or now Hawaii Creole, but we still stick to the word Pidgin. And by redefining it and giving it a different meaning from its origin in English, that's one of the qualifiers on what makes Hawaii Creole English a language. So here we go with the fable of Lorca's three friends to be sung in Pidgin English. Daniel Fa'asili, Elvis Duldulau, Lance Fujimura. Them guys, they never gonna change. Daniel living off Hotel Street hookers and Samoan ferries. Elvis that shrimp with the FOB hair lip, jacking off so much his palms get holes the size of saints. Lance, the only one who had future on his side. Oh, how sad, them three. Lance, Elvis, Daniel, them guys stay burning. Lance in Cebu City pool hall, chewing on squid. Elvis in Cambol, yelling at one Gauguin fat ass model. I said I like one oxtail soup with extra ginger on the side. Daniel forever searching for his name in the obits pages of the Star Bulletin. Lance, Elvis, Daniel, soon 6 feet under. Lance, an invertebrate's wet dream. Elvis gonna shed himself to death. Darren inside the bell of a B-52 cockroach dog paddling across the sink of Patty's Chinese kitchen. Lance, Elvis, Daniel, eyeing the salt on my lifelines. They like lick 'em, that's why. Like three Siamese cats purring at one bird of paradise. Under one scratched glass-eyed moon the gods left behind. one by one, Bombay. Them guys gonna be wrapped up in tea leaves and kaluad like three little pigs. Their mothers get all goosebumps because the white owls no like stop crying. 3 minus 2 gonna soon be none. I watched them lose it halfway through Strangers in the Night, singing like Sinatra, karaoke kind at Punani's. And I start to think, pathetic. No, lonely. Oh shit, did I leave the hallway light on? Is the back door waiting for me? How come the moon tonight is one ball of pus? What more can I do? I went kill time, half my shadow gone already, and all around me in this watering hole, we all waiting, falling for something, singing to someone we don't know. Daniel, Elvis, Lance, and that dyke gatekeeper Myrna. She real bullheaded. I could have told you that, but I never, because sometimes she wears lipstick, false eyelashes too. And when the microphone stops singing, that means time for move on, go someplace else. Helion, the ecstatic ones go Odyssey. The lucky ones go Manoa Graveyard. The desperate ones go St. Thomas Square for swing on banyan tree branches. That's where Daniel, Elvis, and Lance go looking for me. But they no can find me. They no can? No, they no can. All right, that's it. All right.
Wow. I remember that piece, Zach. Wasn't that in the chapbook that we published years ago?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. Amazing.
13 scenes to of Montgomery Cliff or something.
Yeah. Yes, it's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wow. Shaheen Qureshi is a first-generation Filipino-Pakistani American poet. Her writing has recently been published in Changes Review, Pinsapo Press, and forthcoming from Ewà Journal. She's currently completing her MFA Bard College and is the co-curator of the online reading series Here I Am Again. You can follow Shaheen on Instagram at here_I_am_again_reading. One of the privileges I can enjoy as a curator, certainly of a remote reading series like this, is that I get to invite poets whom I haven't had yet the chance to hear read. So it's really my honor and my delight to welcome Shaheen to today's lunch poem series. Mabuhay, Shaheen.
Mabuhay. Thank you, Paolo. Thank you, Zach. Kiki and Charles, I can't wait to hear you read. Okay, so I have a few things I want to read. Just some, I think they're all pretty short, so I'll try to breeze through them. I've been kind of obsessed with this classic cocktail book that I've been sort of rewriting my own version of cocktails that I call potations. It's kind of like, I kind of just like went with this form and ran with it, and I can't seem to stop. But it's been a really kind of fun and disturbing adventure. So this is a kind of like a preamble to the series of potations that I've started. And this poem was published in the Pinsapo issue 3, which was like a travel guide. So it's kind of fitting. And the author of this classic cocktail book called The Gentleman's Companion, his name is Charles Baker. And so this is kind of like me intersplicing my mother's immigration with Charles Baker's Oriental junket. Baker visited nearly every Asian city. Mother's first city is Juneau. Ceylon, Singapore, Indochina, the Dutch East Indies. Then Oxnard, at least more Filipinos there than Juneau. Then the Philippines, where Baker, more than once, goes to Niagara Falls, her first souvenir. Says that monkeys, ending up in Washington, D.C., happy to be among Filipino nannies, have no tails. Men like Baker, happy for coolies, strolling foreign babies on Embassy Row, to be fanning them with palm fronds, and hospital and live-in nurses tending carefully, while they fiddled with decanters and bar spoons, with the same dedication they'd give to Baker, enjoying gazing at Asian women, their lolos and lolas, Mother, you haven't even met exquisite figures poured into scabbard-like split dresses. Your baby brother yet, who's just been born back home, of pastel silk that so elegantly suit, for whom you'll eventually bend and clean and scrape enough, their type. Of all Asian drink mixers, he declares, to get him here and your mother and your father, the best to be the Filipinos, and somewhat, there is a selflessness you possess in early morning, and unexpectedly the Japanese. There is some Oriental in the night that moves through you like the fragrance of confusion. And by the end of it all, Baker is a changed man. Some paquitas in Toloto where your uncle said, look, you'd be better off, ruined liver in America. Okay, I'm just gonna switch to my computer. And these quotations, they kind of get a little more, they start off a little more straightforward and then they just kind of go somewhere else. So, the cunning woman's twist. Re-encountered when visiting an ex-banker's holiday bungalow in Borneo. Make this cocktail, one that is such an important part of men's drinking life in the colonies, when you need to momentarily forget the face of your wife back home. 3 baskets of wicker hampers, 5 desiccated orange flowers, 1 pony of oriental magic, a dash of violent nature, lots of crushed ice. Serve in a champagne glass shattered and glued back together by a soft-footed Malay boy. Lonely Asian girls looking for boyfriends. Tell me again across the room how Asian I am and say this joke is just between you and me. Catch a glimpse of our silhouettes on the train and say how good we look together. How hugging can feel like bones crushing. My little Asian bones, my little Asian head, my little Asian everything. Oh, but your skin, you say. My skin, it's true. I am so lonely. Is coyness survival? A Filipino-Pakistani girlfriend, a Chinese American girlfriend, a Laotian Moroccan girlfriend, a Taiwanese French girlfriend. At the edge of knowability, edging is almost knowing, appears a glitter image. It's a shiny mirage. Sequins, sequence, sequestered into being, into borders, bordering an almost knowing. On the edge of town. On the internet, my spam emails think I am a horny man who has erectile dysfunction because somewhere in Saudi Arabia, a man has my name. What fucking would be like if I were? Would it be better than being in an unknowable mirage? Every night I hover over unknowability. You and others glow big and certain, Chinese lanterns on the verge of burning an ancient forest. On a planet besides Earth, ingenuity takes off vertically, hovering, landing, all languish. Pudding arrives, dusty, materialized. How will she fly? She's clever in combining. Pudding takes your swollen mouth to her parted lips. She spits. You can always tell if a man is good by the way he makes a daiquiri. I've only drank a daiquiri made by the hands of a white man. He invents a drink, gives it indigeneity, and tells us there are no Taino left. In the same breath says, look, they exist right here between sips of sugar and bitter. I like mine dry and parched as the red dust sand. Pudding, hold me close. I've been in bed for 2 days. I don't see anybody. Push me to the limit. Bend my knees, make me risky. Help me land somewhere on your dust planet. I don't know how home can be a place anyone goes. Messianic, dossier, bottomless, intricate, fungible. To consume me, you must be a power bottom feeder with money calories. On this planet, we hold porcelain in our purse. And if I have time, I just want to read one poem from Frances Chung. This is from her book, Chinese Apple, which is both Chinese Apple and Crazy Melon are like a love letter to New York's Chinatown. This one's called The Great American Yellow Poem. She heard tales about saving grapefruit skins for cooking. She grew bright under the neon dragon of Chinatown. She made saffron curry rice for friends. She attended a barbecue in Amarillo, Texas. She stepped around yellow piss and snow. She cut herself on a Hawaiian pineapple. She learned to name forsythia where it grew. Visions of ochre and citronella eluded her. Thank you.
Wow. Salamat, Shaheen. And, full disclosure, I was actually planning to read from Frances Chung's book at the start of this, but instinctively I was like, I'll hold off. And
Oh my God.
lo and behold, there you go.
I did it for you.
There's a reason why, Wow, thank you. Cocktails and colonialism. Quick anecdote at the local liquor spot, not far from Alpha Donuts. Actually, I was accosted once by this white dude from Long Island who was selling rum manufactured in the Philippines. And apparently it's very authentic, and it's authentically made by a bunch of French dudes. So there you go, alive and well. Actually, I tried the rum, it wasn't so bad, so I'll be fair. Okay, I ain't gonna be.
They make a good rum, colonizers.
They make, I have to grudgingly say, not bad, But still some room for improvement, so I had to be Filipino with that bad joke. So, Kiki Rivera, she, we, they is an internationally produced award-winning theater artist, educator, and arts activist. They hold a BA in theater and MFA in playwriting from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, and also a member of the 2018 Art Equity Cohort. Original plays include Puzi, featuring award-winning New Zealand playwright Victor Roger, published in the anthology Samoan Queer Lives, Paala Velave, The Interruption, and Lighting the Way, an anthology of short plays about the climate crises. As an educated genderqueer person of color, Samoan, Filipinx, born and raised in Hawaii, Kiki acknowledges their privilege and responsibility to those marginalized communities. Kiki's work focuses on cultural/sexual identity within the context of post-colonization and is one of many voices for Pacific Islanders in the diaspora. Quote, I believe in the value of self-reflective storytelling from a contemporary Indigenous perspective, end quote. Another full disclosure, I was introduced to Kiki's work and world somewhat via Zach Linmark. And so thank you, Zach, for the introduction. And Kiki is streaming while on vacation. So maraming salamat, Kiki, for taking the time to be with us. And over to you, mabuhay.
Mabuhay, and salamat for having me. All right. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you, Zach, for explaining what Pidgin is, so I don't have to. This piece, I'm gonna read two pieces. The first one is done in Pidgin, and it is inspired by a character from my first play, Puzi. I don't really identify as a poet, but I try to include poetry in my plays, and so these two so this one is not in a play yet, but that's where I was thinking. And then the second one is part of a short play that I wrote last year. So this first one is called Upon Release from Oahu Community Correctional, Biscuit addresses a crowd of mostly haoles, which is white people, at an Episcopal church. People think I ignorant because the way I speak, judging, hating. My name is Biscuit, I ain't a flaky Triscuit. Polynesian queer butch shortbread cookie full of butter with a fat dick. I come from K-Town all the way down to Palolo. Public housing repping, got that stink ass Pakalolo. I celebrate the date I came out of Triple C, Oahu Community Correctionality, but feeling locked up in a societal penitentiary. Because you think I'm going to steal your car When you look at me, brown skin is the only sin you see. Your gaze is keeping me in your penitentiary. You wanna help me out, motherfucker? And just let me be. Don't need your handouts or your red tape bureaucracy. An empty box of hope. I hope you choke on howly liberal varieties. But in all honesty, I'll take your white privilege, your souped up white superiority. Take my lava, do a siva or a do-si-do, charge $200 for a luau or a rodeo, then try feed your family with the tips you earn, you silly hoe. I celebrate the date I came out of Triple C, but lock me up again, because I can't stand this world we live in. That's all I got. Thank you, everybody, for your time. This mic, all this food and toiletries and shit. Despite all the shit we've been through, shout out to all my C Block fams and my boy Squee, dropping the beat with me. Crank it up, Squee. I love you, Squee. This next one is called To Our Black and Brown Babies of Ocean and Islands. It's part of the Reset Series coalition. It was a coalition between Conch Shell Productions from the East Coast, Bravo Productions, and Kumukahua Theater. It was done as a collaboration and a response to the Black Lives Matter movement last year. To Our Black and Brown Babies of Ocean and Islands. So I wanted to do something that would be a response to not just Black Lives Matter, but, you know, amongst the Pacific, we are not just people of color, but there's a whole Melanesian family that kind of get looked over in our communities. So, you were born in bitter, bloody water, flowing for 500 years, tainted and weighed down by power and privilege, captured by the American gods of white supremacy. In our village of island academics, diasporic wayfinders, mana moana creatives, white is not a color, it is the lack of. White is an elusive spirit permeating the air, blocking our airways, blinding our own people with hatred of self and each other. Fear not, for you bear the blood of resistance, of freedom fighters, Pacific warriors, and oceanic navigators who find their way under the veil of a bright twinkling past, scattered in the vastness of a beautiful black sky. Remember that creation occurs in blackness. Remember that in our Pacific, gods were made of flesh and blood. They could be argued and contested with, and could therefore be brought down or raised up. American gods are no different. They too can be brought to justice. Their altars can be burned down to make room for peace and equity. But while these gods live, they will smite you and cause you to feel the pangs of inadequacy and mistrust. Center yourself. Acknowledge your mana, the strength of your lineage so great that generational powers of lightness, brightness, and whiteness will attempt to steal your mana and hold you down. Resist, resist and rise, rise like a mighty wave of 40,000 by your side. And as you rise, uplift the voiceless. Bring with you all those who have been held down by that heavy white light of supremacy. March ahead and take active solidarity with your Black and brown relatives, stolen bodies on stolen lands. As you march today, you continue to march alongside our revolutionary past. Polynesian Panthers of 1971, Mau movement, early 1900s Samoa, know that the liberation of Black life in America is the liberation of Black birds of the Pacific, is the liberation of West Papua, is the liberation of all lives that have suffered in the bowels of the serpent of supremacy. And in your full power, when all bodies have risen from the ashes, give thanks to the old gods of the natural world. Give thanks to those who have come before you and those who will journey with our legacies into the future. Thank you.
Maraming salamat, Kiki. Mabuhay. Wow. Wow, there's I can't wait to have our Q&A after Charles's reading, but 1898 just keeps flashing in front of me. 1898 for educators all across this country. Charles Valle was born in Manila, Philippines, and immigrated to California when he was 7 years old. So like me and Zach, 1.5er, right? Quote, and when I think of the phrases unturned, the lines not breaking the words that will never ring for you, Vivian, I am reminded of the histories wrought with erasure, end quote, are among the astonishing lines that opened Proof of Stake, Charles's book-length elegy about his late daughter Vivian, who passed away shortly after her birth in 2011, and to whom his long poem is addressed. At once, Howl, Somebody Blew Up America, and the disintegration loops for our pandemic and new yellow peril era, Valle's extraordinary poem is further proof of the stake that 21st century experimental BIPOC poets, including Kamal Brathwaite, M. Norbezi, Fred Waugh, Jordan Abel, Douglas Kearney, Barbara Jane Reyes, and Aldrine Valdez, continue to claim in the elegy to explore and create powerful new modes of grieving and protest. Quote, let me tell you about my poetics of grief, end quote, Valle's speaker offers, mourning Vivian's absence, yet absorbing, quote, the opposite of decisive moments, end quote, so that they might, quote, invent a new plasticity of language and strike these words to widen the aperture, to blur the background, all that baggage and buttery bouquet, unrecognizable, dark, end quote. Let me tell you about Charles Valle's debut book of poetry. Brilliant, moving, unforgettable, Proof of Stake breaks new ground for the elegy, and your heart along with it. Mabuhay, Charles Valle.
Thank you so much, Paolo. Thank you, everybody, for coming this morning or this afternoon. I'm outside now because there's a lot of construction and going on in the house. So give me a thumbs up if the volume's okay. Does it sound good? All right.
Hold on, Charles, is that actually the outside behind you, or is that a screenshot?
That is actually my backyard. Yeah.
That's incredible. For a New Yorker, that's incredible. Okay.
I know. All right, guys. So yeah, the book comes out tomorrow. Very, very excited. Very, very grateful to Paolo for inviting me, Brooklyn Rail for hosting. Paolo gave an amazing blurb for the book. And as he was talking about, this is an elegy that, I wrote for our daughter, Vivian. It's been an amazing experience. So I'm gonna read a little section from it. And I'll just get into it. And the shards are calcifying with each tweet, every thread coiling, unspooling and not once again. Culture pressed and dried. Think then of the Chinese paper makers captured by the caliphate, bound and willing or unbound in conjecture. Those abbesses knew they had something good, but could they have ever fathomed how the prisoners would change the world forever? Think then of other use cases, perhaps say poplar panels for mannerists, elongating limbs and distorting perspectives, as in a circle not a circle, or a square not a square. Parallelograms in comfort and grief. And memories are foreshortening still. Is trauma receding or ready to pounce once more? Am I at the foot or the heart of all these laments? And already the memories are being overwritten. The sharp, jagged edges filed down, more polished, more cinematic. But how do we foreshorten emotions so that the dullness seems farther? How do we resurrect the intensity of those first few hours when everything felt too vivid? Hashtag latergram. It's 2011 and I'm sitting on the floor in a hospital hallway. The incandescent buzzing moving to the foreground. I do not know whether to place my hands on my temples or rip out my hair. Genderless scrubs blur by, a cacophony of medical terms burst forth. I try to focus on something before me and fixate on the geometric shapes on the newly waxed floor. Is this cinematic enough? The incandescent buzzing transitions, arpeggiated minor chords and heavy reverb, rising and falling, moving towards some expected crescendo that we may or may not endure. And for some time after, there were no words, just emotions articulated through strict serialism, social interactions mediated through scripted pursed lips quivering, the constant negotiation of trying to be present or yielding to the rising effect of being a spectator to your own conversations, the numbness so encompassing, hashtag no filter. And the portability of grief is such a wondrous thing, the transit so efficient, every circumstance so easily succumbing to tenebristic splendor, the unsettling realism of the eyes you never opened, Vivian, the lifeless hand that could not grip my trembling fingers, follow me across continents, from Europe to Asia. The dark background persists with single sources of light shining on different body parts. One day it is your perfectly shaped eyebrows, the next, the meconium spilling out of your nose, your mouth. I close my eyes in Cambodia and see your hands. I wake up in Iceland and the light focuses on your chin, your lips. In Singapore, I burn incense and imagine your voice. In the Philippines, I scatter your ashes on the leeward side of hope and reflection. The prismatic nature of remains, ashen and oaken, bits of bones so far removed from any sense of purpose or structure, mourning and residue. The structures of grief pressed and dried, textures so indecipherable, they disorient with ease. Emotional glyphs, aspirating sullied surfaces. I'm trying to make sense of it all, but the meanings escape as quickly as the memories form. A scent here, a song there, feeling you tumble and kick through your mother's worn sweater, the ultrasounds like cosmic pulses, codes I could never decipher. In retrospect, were there messages in the space noises, nuances lost in stilted poetics of remembrance? If only I had faith, I would embrace divination, or in desperation, attend a seance or divine meaning in tea leaves, in coffee grounds, in tarot cards, stars alignments, in cosmic conjunctions, in retrogrades. Let me tell you about my poetics of grief. Unintegral, lower limit memory, upper limit intertextuality. Some things we'll never know. Others we recreate in inadequate prototypes. Fading fast, a euphemism for bringing ideas to life without rigor or discipline. The things in themselves, such rough translations, they are nearly comical. And everything is an act of translation. And everything slips between bounded context. Putangin ako is Tagalog for I love you. Come mierda y muere is Spanish for I hope you feel great. Malakia is Greek for lovely. Domain-driven design is geek for fuck all y'all. Stakeholder fatigue is business speak for back the fuck up. Defund the police is American for I want to skull fuck your grandma and eat your babies. Blue Lives Matter is American for just harvesting strange fruit in my poplar grove. How do we continue when so much depends on stable interfaces connecting? If not in outrage, then in poetry. If not in poetry, then in song. Thanks, guys.
Wow. Buhay Charles, Kiki, Shaheen, and Zach. We're gonna have a Q&A next. I think we're doing okay on time. Malvika, let me know if we're not. I'm super eager. I'm like Lin-Manuel Miranda enthusiastic when it comes to this portion of a program, so you can feel free to check me. So I have, my first question is for Charles. First of all, advance happy pub day. It's tomorrow. Another layer to the occasion of today's reading. Like, I'm really excited for your book and for Phonograph Editions, which is a great press. I know how much the first book means to you and to any poet, but I'm curious to know what your journey has been like up to this point as a poet, because you've been involved in poetry for a very long time, and you've been managing editor of a very major journal and have, I think, several manuscripts, right? And here we are a day removed from your first book. What has this journey been like for you?
It's been it's been incredible. I think it's having been part of the poetry community, and especially like small press, independent press. It's been strange in many ways. I think for me, I think when I graduated from an MFA program, almost 20 years ago or 17 years ago, whatever that was, I think I definitely wanted a book out. I didn't really know what the community was about. And I think, spending time meeting so many great people, I think that was enough for me in terms of what it was doing, the need to be part of that. I never really felt the need to continue, like, pursuing publishing a book, or getting the work out there. In certain ways, I think, over the past couple of years, as I've gotten older, I've been writing this whole time, and it was just like, I should probably get something out there at this point. And it was just, having, working full time, helping my wife raise two kids, it's hard finding that time. So it's something that just keeps getting deferred and deferred. And I think the opportunity arose, last year with Phonograph Editions, and is more of a forcing function for me to, put out a product, basically, which has been great. But, in many ways, it's definitely given me an appreciation. I think that if I would have had the book published when I was younger, I don't think I would have really fully grasped it, I think.
Salamat. And the journal I'm referring to is Fence, but Charles has been involved in so many different ways. Charles is also a really talented DJ, FYI. I don't know if you still, it's so cliched, right? Filipino DJ, but it's a good kind of a cliche, but not hip hop, right? Actually, that's the difference. That's the unique thing. I don't know if you're still DJing, but I'll never forget that talent of yours. I wanted to ask this next question of all of our readers, maybe starting with Kiki and then Shaheen and then Zach. How is your current writing practice in the midst of the pandemic? Certainly. How's your writing doing these days?
Yeah, it's slowed down a lot. Trying to just survive off of the gigs that pay. But I have been writing small things. My plays have gotten smaller because my attention span has gotten shorter. So like real short 5 to 10 minute plays. And also not a lot of time to practice writing now because I have to work. I got a job, but that's great, right? We can pay the bills now.
How about you, Shaheen?
Yeah, I feel like for a while there, probably at the beginning of lockdown, I was actually at a residency in Oregon, and I had to like fly back home, and that kind of just like put a wrench in all of my like creative work. And yeah, I think for me, I just couldn't write. I couldn't even read. I just like had such difficulty with language. And then when the summer happened, and these really intense times of racial reckonings, I was like, I can't even like look at a book without like wanting to scream. And it was a really tough time. And I think what I had to do to kind of find my way back to writing was I had to do something very tactile. And I ended up, and I love, actually, Charles, you had a line at the beginning of your reading, the Chinese paper makers. I started making paper and just like really trying to do something that was like more embodied and like grounding, because writing just wasn't doing that for me. And I was thinking a lot about, the history of paper making and Chinese paper makers and how it all kind of connected with the work I was doing. And I think it really helped me like get back into writing. And now I'm finishing up my MFA and I'm here at Bard for the summer, and fingers crossed I finish. And it's been really great to be in person again in community. I think that was another big takeaway for me, is that I have to be in community. I have to be in conversation with writers and artists, and I just can't, I'm turn dysfunctional if I'm like just alone and isolated and sitting with my thoughts. So community I think is so important for me as a writer.
And speaking of community, you have your reading series that is ongoing. Is that right?
Yeah, that's something that is Carolyn still here? Carolyn, my friend, she and I started this like pandemic virtual reading series just to kind of like do something with our time and feel connected and feel close. And I feel like each time we learn something different about Zoom. But it's been like, it just has kept going, and it's like gained some momentum, and we've had some really amazing readers, and just like immense gratitude for people to be able to read for us. And we've had really interesting pairings and people who had never read together, and kind of across the country, which is something that couldn't have happened without this virtual space. So we're hoping we're going to keep it going. Yeah.
So everyone sees the link and definitely check out Shaheen's series. And Zach, how about yourself? A novel? You're working on a novel. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm working on a bunch of stuff actually. So I was in Hawaii when COVID, the lockdown began, and so I had to cancel my spring book tour and a residency in Paris. But what this, in a very twisted way, what this pandemic did was it forced me to be in a place for a very, indefinite time. Usually when I'm in Hawaii, it's just for a break. And but this time I was there from March until September, and that's the longest I've been in a very long time. And it forced me to not limit my thoughts, and to challenge me. And what it did actually was it gave me the opportunity, the lockdown, to connect and reconnect with the place that I grew up in. And because most of the time I live in the Philippines, in Baguio. And so being back in Hawaii and then doing this anthology on Hawaii Creole English, it gave me that, that blessed opportunity to like reconnect with the local writers, and realizing how rich, considering that we only started publishing in this vernacular since late 1970s, the fact that we were able to chronicle almost 100 years of our history as locals in Hawaii with this language that since it was born had been the target of censorship, and and the speakers stigmatized as uneducated, illiterate, savages, uncivilized, all of that. And but this and Kiki Rivera, the first poem that you read, that she read, is going to be an anthology called No Talk Li Dat. And so I don't know. It's just really, I could sit in the room and just depress myself or just make something. And I got depressed, of course. But I got to the point where I challenged myself and I actually started writing a novel chronicling this virus and how it's affecting islanders. And it's in Pidgin. So anyway, and I'm wrapping that up along with the anthology and a play.
Wow. So it sounds like you've been really industrious and productive, and the change of setting hasn't stopped that flow. Now that you're working on this really important anthology.
Well, I also thought, like, look, if we're gonna die, I want to die doing something I want to do, and not because just waiting for this thing to hit the island. And I think we were all waiting for that. And once it hit the island, we all went on lockdown mode and prevented the rest of the world from coming in. And which explains why Hawaii had the least number of cases. Because if this thing went out of control, we would all be dead, I'm sure.
Yeah. Actually, on that note, my next question actually concerns the ANHPI community in this particular moment where we're seeing our community violently assailed by folks who want to scapegoat us for this virus. And I actually want to start first with you, Zach, and you, Kiki, because of your perspective coming from outside of the mainland, and even Asian Americans in the mainland just don't have a wide enough lens to see, just how imperial the racial situation is in our country. And I'd love to know what your thoughts have been, your own coping mechanisms have been in the face of this really debilitating, violence against us. Kiki or Zach?
I'll let you start, Zach.
I don't know where to begin.
I know.
The thing too is, we see race differently in Hawaii.
Yeah.
We don't see it the way mainlanders or continental US. We don't, first of all, this term Asian American label is a very contemporary thing that was filtered through the university setting. We never identified ourselves in Hawaii as hyphenated American. You ask a native Hawaiian to hyphenate himself, herself, or themselves, and they got punched in the face. I mean, you never hear native Hawaiian American identifying themselves as that. It's the same thing with the other Asians. We never even call ourselves Asians. We're local Filipinos, local Chinese. The hyphenated American was never an issue until just recently. So we are in that, like, we're in between Asia and America. That's our vantage, right? But we do form solidarity with the Asian Americans, because I am Asian American. When I step into continental US, I don't identify myself as Asian American when I'm in Hawaii. I don't think anybody does who are from there. Now, with this whole thing, there's been a history. It's not just now. History even in Hawaii. And what this thing did was that even with this COVID, we had the plague in Hawaii in 1900, where they had to quarantine and barricade Chinatown using US military guards. This shit is not new. I mean, and so this is, we had a plague there in 1900 that I don't know if anybody knew about it, and then of course with leprosy before that. Just looking at it from the, disease, the history of diseases in the islands. They brought it there first of all, right? Let's not forget that. But this thing about even with mental illness, I think racism is some form of mental illness. That's what I think. Anyway.
Yeah, just to add on to that, it is a very I agree with what Zach said. And for myself, being now living in the continent, it's a very uncomfortable experience because I've never identified as an Asian American. I think even the term Pacific Islander is very politicized. And we just see ourselves differently. We don't even identify as Americans. So that in itself is an uncomfortable reality when you're being in the continent, being put in these spaces of AAPI. For example, I was asked by one of my boss to think of content for APAM. And she did this through text message. And I went, what's APAM? So I had to Google what APAM was. And then, then I saw, okay, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And I was like, oh, is that a nonprofit? What do they do? That's interesting. And then I got to World May. Yeah, so it's an interesting experience. I was impacted by the violence towards Asian Americans. And that was another experience. I didn't cope with that pain until I was in other spaces, in other healing spaces that allowed me to do so. I did find myself distancing myself from the whole online space. Yeah, sorry, I'm not very eloquent in talking about this because it is very new still, and it's a lot to process.
I mean, if I could just add something to that, like Paolo, you brought up 18, and this is why maybe the reason why we don't even identify as Americans, because if you look at the history of Hawaii, 1893 was the overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy, right? 1898, illegally annexed. Annex is, I think, is defined as illegally, along with the Philippines, 1898, right? 1959 is statehood. You have to think like 1898 to 1950, it took them that long to turn it into a statewide because of World War II. Imagine, what state do you think is run or governed or predominantly brown? That's why it took long. That's why it took long. Not that we, and then even if it was through a process of election and most of them voted yes, but in a matter of a decade or two, there's been a reassessment, almost remorse. I want to use the word remorse. But anyway.
I mean, just that year, 1898, I mean, you have Jim Crow happening here, and, you have, Puerto Rico, you have Guam, right? The expansion of Manifest Destiny. Just seems like a really good starting point for American educators, K-12 level, to, focus on, to better explain to their students why we're in this moment, right? But I'd love to hear from Shaheen and Charles, how you're all doing, check in with you, in the midst of Yellow Peril.
Yeah, I was actually just having dinner with some friends last night, and we were talking about this, how all like this string of alphabets that we now use to identify with. And it's like this unfortunate tool because it's like this feeling of like just wanting to be seen, I think for Asian Americans, like we just want to be seen, we just want to be heard, we just want to be acknowledged. And so then we have to, especially in the context of the United States, we have to like dumb down or simplify our identities. And that logic, like it totally erases all the nuances and complexities of the Asian experience. And for me, like I am half Filipina, half Pakistani. So like there's this whole South Asian part of me. And yeah, I mean, growing up, I never really could understand like where I like fit in because I was sort of like outside of both of those communities and identities. And I think you know, during this time, I was like, I felt like my writing was so activated already in these like feelings and thoughts that I just thought like I couldn't even touch it. It was like too hot to touch. And, you know, I don't know, I feel like as like disappointing as it is to have like AAPI and Asian American, you know, and like how exclusionary even those terms are when you think of the umbrella of Asianness and like brown Asians. I also just feel like, you know, there needs to be solidarity though, you know, and some kind of coalition building. And like, this is a step. It's definitely not a movement yet, or it's still sort of, I don't know. I mean, I look at like, you know, Black civil rights and I see a lot of intersection in terms of solidarity there. And figuring out how, you know, Asian Americans can also like just come together, you know, like really build a coalition. And it sometimes feels impossible because it's so kind of stratified and so complex. And there isn't like just like a single target enemy, you know. So that's like what I've been really sitting with and having conversations with my friends. And like, this is really like between, I think, myself and like my Asian friends, especially just having safe places to talk about these difficult things, you know, because there's anti-Blackness in our communities and our families. And yeah, just to be able to talk about that.
Paolo, can I jump in for a second?
Sure.
The conversation is so hot. Shaheen, I really appreciate your comments, and I want to highlight something Zach said just a few moments ago that I wrote down in my notes, which is that, you know, as a native Hawaiian, to hyphenate, I guess I'm wondering, I was really interested in this, I'm always interested in this question of like, what is the work of, what is the labor that the hyphen is doing when you do Asian American, you do, you know, all of these kinds of hyphenated identities. And I really appreciate what Zach said, that like one aspect of the work, sorry, I'm losing my thread. I feel like what we're talking about is like the big tent question, right? Is that we form a big tent so that we can form like relationships of solidarity and affinity as like minority groups, right? And that is like useful for coalition building and useful for community, as you said. And this is something I feel like I think about all the time. It's like, what are the limits to the coalition? Like, what are the limits to the big tent? You know, what happens when, and where do we draw the line of like, to enter the big tent, how much do you have to flatten the experience, right? Because for instance, like when I think about the history of like the term Asian American, it's like relatively new, right? It's like from the 90s onward, and it was initially proposed and kind of circulated as a kind of bond of affinity with like African Americans, right? Like that is like where the thinking was. It was coming out of like, you know, California in the 90s. But I can't really comment on whether that's how Asian American hyphenated identities is used these days. I also really agree with like everything that's being said, that I find that like I don't hyphenate, I don't descriptor myself at all. I'm like, anything you need to know about me you will find from my work and from my name. But I really also think that like that hyphen is targeted and used these days in this way to like obscure legacies of empire and like legacies of power relations. Like I think it is really weird to like try and hyphenate. It's weird to hyphenate Iranian American. It's weird to hyphenate like Hawaiian American. Like I think in those moments it's like really worth it to pull out like, no, like by hyphenating you obscure the truth of what is actually happening on the ground here, like the truth that everyone is living.
And just one more thing, like when I was growing up, you know, the word nationality, usually we're all US citizens, so your nationality is US, right? But in Hawaii, when they say what's your nationality, we say Filipino, Chinese.
Right.
So again, I think it's because of perhaps the way that word in Pidgin means ethnicity in English, right? So by the very basis that we're redefining what nationality is, it makes our local vernacular language, right? Doesn't mean that we don't have solidarity. So I hope I'm not being like misunderstood there. Like there is solidarity. The thing too with this identity is like I become somebody else or something else in the eyes of somebody else when I step outside of my home or the place I come from. I have no problem with that, right? But anyway, so yeah.
I feel like NHPI, right? Folks fall under that term. We have like quintuple consciousness, right? And it has everything to do with stepping in and outside of the boundaries of the empire, stepping outside of the mainland, stepping in the mainland. But I wanted to hear from Charles Valle, just your name, Charles Valle. And I know we had this correspondence not too long ago about how you get mistaken for everything, you know. I know my own experience when we lived in Sunset Park was someone wants to hit me. This is before the pandemic, and they'll stop because they don't quite know what I am, you know. So maybe you could share your thoughts on how things have been for you.
For sure, for sure. It's no, it's interesting because I live in Portland, Oregon, which is it's pretty white out here. And yeah, it's I think there's certain things, right? I think you know, when kind of the violence against Asian Americans, especially in New York, were kind of circulating through mainstream media, I don't think the fear was really that palpable here as I saw kind of like in San Francisco and New York, right? I think by virtue of like it being so almost suburban out here, like I don't think we have the proximity that we have, right? In many ways. Whereas when I was living in New York, you just couldn't help but you know, really come into contact with folks. So there's kind of the physical piece is kind of removed being out here. It's interesting though, like, yeah, back to the name, you know, I think I
think he froze just momentarily at the most exciting part
Yes.
of the sentence.
My
in
God.
terms of how you're gonna call me.
Oh, there's
Okay,
Charles, you paused right when you were giving your answer.
At the pinnacle.
That was very Hitchcockian of you. Pretty amazing. You know, that's the
Sorry,
man
I
working.
think
The man is working. Bill Gates and all of them.
Am I back?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, maybe I'll just take the video off. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah. Is that Pangasinan
Yeah.
Falls?
Yeah, so I don't know where I cut off, but yeah, I mean, I think the name piece is pretty interesting. You know, I think for me, when I introduce myself, I always say Valley, you know, basically just so I can have a little bit of volition in terms of what I'm called. Yeah, I mean, you know, back to kind of the representation. I think I love this conversation, by the way, and thinking through about the how do we unhyphenate or how do we kind of reconstruct the hyphen is a really interesting topic. I'd love to talk more about that. You know, again, I think from my experience here, we're so far removed in Portland. I feel like we're not even part of a reality out here sometimes.
Yeah, Portland's pretty homogenous, right? And Proud Boys are based there. So, I mean, I guess it's good that the visibility for HPI folks is not that great there for that reason alone. But just to bring it back to poetry, and we only have time for, I guess, this one more consideration, is within the history of even the Asian American canon, like going back to the Big IE, like Filipinos were left out, right? Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders were left out of that. And it was primarily cis hetero one group, right? And I think just for me personally, just that term, the fact that it's by its nature so confusing and troubling is very meaningful for me as a poet, where, you know, language is forever unstable and decentered, just in my own experience as an immigrant and the violence of language that I've grown up around in the Philippines. And it's actually very meaningful for my identity as a poet to be within this group where it's ever shifting and ever fixing. And we're like the Loki of race relations, right? We're the trickster in the discussion of race. You bring in Asian Americans, A and HPI, to the conversation. And you're going to have to really make sure that you're open-minded and you're nuanced in terms of where you're going to have this conversation. But when it comes to your next work, your projects, could you share with us in the limited time we have left? What do we have to look forward to from you, Shaheen, Charles, Kiki, and Zach? In that order. Elevator pitch round.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to keep making my potations and serving them somehow. But yeah, I mean, just to echo a little bit what you were just saying, Paolo, like I find a lot of solidarity with like French Algerians and like the Algerian independence and struggle for that, and like this relationship with the colonizers' language, and like I'm a poet because I have to mess with this language, and part of that messing is also like not necessarily beautifying it or making it, beautiful in terms of like a poetic or lyrical sense, but kind of just like, this is kind of an ugly language, it's violent, and that's where I'm really interested in. And yeah, I'm just gonna keep doing this project and hope that, I'm really keen on collaborating. So it's really great to be, in community with all of you and to keep that going. So important.
Salamat. How about you, Zach?
Well, I'm actually wrapping up the anthology on Hawaii Creole English poetry and prose. It's called Hawaii Creole actually now. And but what I learned from this project is that it actually defunks the Tower of Babel, where you can have people in one tower with different languages, and if push comes to shove, they will create a common language. I mean, Prometheus stole the fire from gods. I mean, the thing with this language too is that there's no one dominant group that governed or constructed this language. This is a collective effort. I cannot think of any other language in this country that is similar or that has produced something like Pidgin or Hawaii Creole, where you have, and it's still evolving because predominantly this language is the language of immigrants. And so now we have an influx of Micronesian people from the Micronesia, right? And they're giving it their own twist, their own take on this language. And so it's very interesting to see actually the evolution of this language from when it was only Hawaiian Pidgin to now.
Kiki, you get 50 seconds.
Well, collaboration with Zach, other collaborations, just building community with the NHPI communities in California. And working, what it is to be an art, not just a poet or a playwright, but what it means to collaborate with each other and just create, just build together. So that's on the horizon. Thank you.
And we'll end with Pacific Northwest, Charles.
Guys, yeah, just the book's coming out. I think probably gonna continue working on that project. Honestly, it's a small part of a larger project. I think the project I'm really excited about is this project on Cermeno. I don't know if you guys know Sebastian Cermeno. I'd love to do like a kind of a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern kind of version of Cermeno getting lost and sinking a ship. I think that'd be fantastic.
And on that note, we are going to set sail. Sorry, the puns have to keep coming. I'm Filipino. I'm so grateful to Malvika and the Rail for hosting us, and thank you all for being here. And please support our poets. Check out their work. Check out the reading series. And I'm Paolo Javier, sending love from Queens.
Thank you, Paolo. I'll close this out. I'll do it in 30 seconds. I love you emceeing. I feel like I'm usually the one with the nautical metaphors, and here you've come, taking the wind out of my sails. Thank you so much, Shaheen, Kiki, Charles, Zach, and of course, thank you, Paolo, for bringing us all together, for opening the space and filling it, leaving us with like so many thoughts. I love that last phrase. How do we unhyphenate, or how do we reconstruct the hyphen? Shaheen, I love that, like, you're framing it in terms of the relationship with the colonizer's language, the colonizer's gaze, and this makes me think like, also we've landed on like we can quote the Shakespeare because of these dynamics, but you've learned the colonizer's language, and like my profit on it is I know how to curse. So where do I direct those curses? As always, we'll share the recording of today's reading on our archives as well as on YouTube. It'll be available in a day or two if you want to revisit this magical space. And please join us again tomorrow as we kick off a new series, Publishing in Transit, curated by poet and translator Cole Swenson. Each month will be visited by an editor from the world of literary presses and publishing to throw open the doors and give us all a view on the inside world of literary publishing and all that goes on. Tomorrow, we're joined by New York Review Books editor Edwin Frank, alongside two of their writers from across the world, Arvind Krishna Mehrotra and Eugene Ostashevsky, and that will be, as always, at 1 p.m. right here in the Zoom. Other than that, thank you all so much. I know we got to bounce, but I'm going to invite you all to turn on your microphones if you'd like to say hello to one another, goodbye on your way out, or anything else that comes to mind. Thank you so much.
Boy, everyone. Take care.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Salamat.
Love
Thank you.
for reading.
Thanks, Shaheen. And Zach.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Wow, cheers, cheers. Thank you.